Hello boys and girls, welcome back to our next chapter in Mr. Mousey, Beyond the Silver Sea. Now where did we leave off? Oh yes, well for the third time Mr. Rabbit has fallen off the carpet. He woke up on the carpet, and I suppose you know what it's like whenever you waken in the morning you're not quite sure where you are. Well, he just walked off the carpet thinking he was at home and disappeared off down towards the sea far below them. So what happens next? Well, this chapter is called Chapter 9, The Pirates. At first, Mr. Mousey could hardly believe his eyes. The shock of seeing Mr. Rabbit fall off the carpet a third time was almost too much to take in. Fall off? What is he thinking about? He positively walked off. Leaping out of the bag, the mouse looked over the edge of the carpet. Of Mr. Rabbit, there was no sign. He sharpened his gaze and studied the water below. Part of the problem was that the carpet was still carrying on in its southerly direction, a direction in which, when Mr. Mousey cast his eyes, was the unmistakable sign of approaching land. Mr. Mousey rushed to the back of the carpet and peered back. What he saw made him jump. A ship. Tall and erect on the sea, it had 3 masts and many sails. As he watched, he saw it put by. It came around and put about and turned hard to the right. Mr. Mousey knew that it was called starboard. He also knew that the flag it was flying, a skull and crossbones, made it a pirate ship. For a second, Mr. Mousey was completely at a loss what to do. Only for a second, though. Although it was impossible for him to fly the carpet on his own using the controls, he remembered the words of command he had read the night before. "Carpet, halt thy flight," commanded the mouse, recalling to his mind the words as he spoke. The carpet came to a rapid halt that almost bowled him over. Managing to keep his feet, he thought hard and gave a second command. "Carpet, turn behind." The carpet turned 180 degrees and now faced the direction from which they had come. "Carpet, advance at full speed." The carpet positively leapt forward and the little mouse threw himself down onto his belly. Stretching out, he tilted the carpet to steer it and was relieved when it responded in a slanting dive. He rocked slightly and saw that the carpet was reacting to his movements. Ahead, about a mile distant, the ship seemed to have slowed. Some sails were lowered and he could see some activity off one side. He wondered what it was doing. It occurred to him that the ship was probably in pretty much the very spot where Mr. Rabbit had fallen off. "Carpet, advance at full speed," cried the little mouse, directing the carpet directly at the ship. By now, however, whatever it was that they had turned around for had been completed, for sails were being hoisted and the vessel was coming to again. Mr. Mousey's speed had to be seen to be believed. He was closing on the ship, which now faced him, at an incredible pace. Within seconds he would be there. In fact, he now realised, within seconds he would be smashing head on into the prow at a speed in excess of 100 miles an hour. "Carpet, rise!" he called out, only just in time. The tips of the masts whizzed by as the carpet climbed and flew over and past the ship. He levelled out and banked around, slowing as he did so. He was now looking down on the scene from very high up, so he commanded the carpet to descend and slow again. The sails of the pirate ship were billowing and full, and the sea was marked with its wash and a trail of bubbles tailing out behind it. Mr. Mousey halted the carpet at the spot where the ship had turned about and brought the carpet to within a couple of feet of the surface. The ship was sailing off, making good headway towards the land to the south, while the mouse searched the sea in search of his friend. "Mr. Rabbit!" he called at the top of his voice over the swell. Mr. Rabbit! Mr. Rabbit! Nothing. He whistled. He called. And then he wept. Dear friend, where are you? The wind was beginning to lift as he looked around helplessly. The sea was changing from a calm swell to much choppier waves, and as he looked over his shoulder towards the north and the direction from which they had come, he could see dark, angry clouds gathering. Just then, his sharp eyes caught a flash of red. He moved the carpet towards it and fished it out of the water. It was his scarf, the one Mr. Rabbit had been using for a pillow. Bubbles were still rising from the wake of the pirate ship all around, and Mr. Mousey looked up in the direction of the retreating sails. Mr. Rabbit, you've been kidnapped! Mr. Mousey's eyes narrowed in steely determination. Of course, it was possible that the pirates, and he wasn't yet certain that they were, had rescued his pal. For all he knew, he was being dried off and looked after in the best way possible, but still. He decided to be cautious in approaching the ship. Rising to about 10 feet from the sea, he moved off after the receding ship and kept himself concealed behind the rucksacks. He was fairly sure he hadn't been spotted, and he wanted to use this to his advantage as much as possible. Anyone looking out behind from the ship would have had to look intently to spot such a small following outline in such a vast sea, a sea that was quickly darkening. Even if the object had been spotted, the observer would merely assume it to be a seabird. This was the mouse's hope anyway. As he neared the vessel, he could make out the details of its structure. It was a classic square rigger, each mast having great billowing rectangles of white sail. Several windows looked out to sea from the back, or stern, as the back of a ship is called. He hoped no one had the time to be looking out as he closed and got closer to within 50 feet. One of the windows looked open, and when he flew closer, found indeed that it was. The rising wind was beginning to affect his control of the carpet, making flying level increasingly difficult. He urged the carpet forward through the gusting wind, trying to get the carpet up against the open window. It was becoming more difficult by the second. Not only was the rising wind buffeting the carpet about in an alarming sort of a way, but the ship itself was rising and falling with the growing waves. The ship didn't sail forward with an even progress either, but lurched and pitched about like an untamed stallion, bucking and kicking. Fighting for control, he tried to hold position while looking for an opportunity to get to the window. Just as things were looking hopeless, the wind died for a second. "Now!" he cried. "Carpet, advance!" It was a small enough target to aim for, but it was now or never. The carpet bucked forward, but at the same time the ship heaved to port as a large wave crashed down on the starboard side. The little mouse pulled at the side of the carpet, trying to pull left. Instead, the carpet went into a spin and he attempted to cling on. It was no use. He fell away from the carpet, which spun above him. As he fell, he felt a tremendous sense of failure. Having travelled so far, to fail so miserably and let my friend down, was the way his despairing mind was thinking as he landed with an almighty whump on something rather more solid than seawater. At the same time, he felt a bang on his head, and suddenly all was darkness. Let's return to Mr. Rabbit. What's happened to him? Well, returning to Mr. Rabbit, when he had sleepily stepped off the edge of the carpet, he had imagined himself to be at home. It was not an idea that was destined to have a long life, and in fact that idea died off as soon as he began to fall. Now, a new idea came to birth, which was that he was only dreaming and would soon wake up. This second idea, just like the first idea, was also short-lived, being rudely ended by the shock of hitting very cold water at about 50 miles an hour. Unfortunately for Mr. Rabbit, his next idea, which was that he was drowning, lasted longer than the first two ideas and looked like lasting as long as the rabbit himself. Mind you, that would not have been very long either if it had not been for what happened next. Mr. Rabbit, like Mr. Mousey, could not swim for love nor money. In fact, whatever you asked him to swim for, he still couldn't do it. Fish! Fish swim! Mr. Rabbit would often point out to anyone who asked him about this. And since this was perfectly true, and therefore very hard to argue with, Mr. Mousey tended to agree and would just nod in agreement. So, when the rabbit found himself in the middle of a particularly vast amount of unswimmable sea, it was a bit late to learn. Not that this prevented him from thrashing about in a most energetic fashion. Every limb of his rabbity body was madly flailing about in every direction they could possibly move, plus a few others they had probably never done before. This had the effect of turning the sea where he was into a mini hurricane of splashing, bubbles and screams. All very dramatic indeed, and very eye-catching, especially to the sailor who was at that moment trying to shush off a strange large gull that was fluttering about in a very determined manner in front of him. He had been scanning the sea from the vantage point of the crow's nest at the bottom of the main mast on the very ship Mr. Mousey was to encounter later on. The gull distracted him from the direction he had been looking, and turning off to fend the insistent bird, caught sight of the struggling rabbit. "Starboard ho!" cried the sailor to the decks below. "Man in the water!" At the wheel the captain looked right, and seeing the disturbance in the water, called out to the sailors manning the deck, "Hard to starboard! Lower the mainsail!" As he did so, he pulled hard on the wheel and the sturdy vessel veered to the right, even as she pitched alarmingly to the left. "Man the gaffs! Hook 'em as we pass!" he cried as the ship sailed within feet of the rabbit. Mr. Rabbit felt himself being hauled out of the freezing water as one of the sailors managed to get a long pole with a large hook on the end around his middle. A couple of others assisted him in pulling the sodden rabbit on board and dumping him with a squishy bump on the deck. Leaving the wheel with the first mate, the captain made his way down from the upper deck to where Mr. Rabbit lay on his back, spluttering and gasping for air. The sailors, who had formed an inquisitive circle around him, gave way as their captain strode up. Stopping 2 or 3 feet from the wet bundle before him, he looked surprised as he exclaimed, "It be a rabbit! We got ourselves a rabbit!" Looking up, Mr. Rabbit found himself looking at a sight he had not been expecting. Now, just what he had been expecting was hard to say, but a grim-looking, one-eyed, sword-buckled rat was not what he was expecting. Around him stood a motley bunch of equally unexpected characters. There was what appeared to be a hunched-over, greasy-looking squirrel. On its head was a red scarf tied in a knot at the back, and in its hand was a horribly curved and notched cutlass. Beside the squirrel was another creature. It may have been a particularly starved beaver. One of its eyes was having a good look at the other, which wasn't looking anywhere in particular at all. It wore a worn-out leather waistcoat and was one of the creatures holding the pole with the hook that had been used to fish the rabbit out of the water. There were a number of other similar creatures, if any of them could be said to be similar to the other, looking on. Before he had time to take in any more, the rat with the patch on his eye spoke again. Rabbit stew is as good as a feast to an hungry sailor. Stick it in the pot, lads. As he turned to leave, Mr. Rabbit jumped to his feet. Excuse me! Excuse me, but I hope the rabbit stew you're talking about doesn't include any of this actual rabbit, meaning me. The departing sailor stopped dead in his tracks and turned around open-mouthed. Right, who's playing funny like? Who's Mr. Smarty's going to get a piece of steel wrapped around his neck then? As he spoke, he looked accusingly at the ragged group of pirates standing around. As one man, they all pointed fingers, sticks, swords, and anything else pointy at Mr. Rabbit. Was him, gov? Said a hamstery-type thing. Was the rabbit? Hisself as spoke. Weren't us, Captain, sir, weren't us? The rabbit brought his sword up angrily and looked as if to give anyone near him a deadly swipe when a rising swell and gusting wind hit the vessel at the same time, causing he and all the others to have to grab something to hold their footing. Well, all of the others except for the beaver. He clutched wildly and somehow managed to grab his own leg, which he clutched at altogether too wildly. This had the effect of pulling himself off the deck and landing pretty much flat on his nose at Mr. Rabbit's feet. He let out in a burst of air. Wasn't me, Captain. I never moved. 'Twas the ship. I know that, you stupid twit, cried the Captain Rat. Watch out, lads. There be a heavy weather coming. Man your stations. Again he turned to go, his anger apparently forgotten as soon as it had arrived. Mr. Rabbit decided to speak again. Only, if you do mean me, he continued, you'd best know that I'm not exactly on my own, and you'd better be careful what you do. Seeing now, with his own eyes, that indeed it was the rabbit that was doing the talking, the captain's eyes opened wide in amazement at what he was seeing. Well, bless my rotten old heart. It's as true as rats are handsome. You can talk. An actual living, breathing, talking rabbit. He looked genuinely shocked. What's so funny? Asked a slightly put-out rabbit. After all, you're a rat, and you're getting pretty close to what I would call talking yourself. The rat strode forward and took the rabbit by the scruff of the neck. Listen here, rabbit. I ought to have you chucked back into the sharks, and then we'd see what all your yabbering does for you. He paused and considered something. But you're right. Can't be right to eat something as talks back to you. Not proper. Not pirate-like. He turned to the beaver, who had by now picked himself off the deck after letting go of his own leg. Here, Nogger, take him below. We'll sort him out after we take care of this coming storm. Turning away again, the rat captain swaggered off towards the poop deck at the stern, giving out sharp commands as he went. The deck was really beginning to heave now, and Mr. Rabbit had to grab hold of some ropes tied off nearby to keep his balance. Let go of the shrouds, young'un, came a voice to his right ear. May as well follow me like quiet and save the bother of a wrestling match. It was the beaver, Nogger. Shrouds? Asked Mr. Rabbit, reckoning he could probably take the beaver on in a fight, but wondering if it was worth the effort. Aye, shrouds. Don't he know now? Not much of a sailor if he don't know what he's got in his mitt. Mr. Rabbit guessed then that the ropes and netting he was holding on to probably had a name, as would everything else on a ship, actually. The beaver took him without force by the arm and led him forward. At the front of the ship, the deck raised up like a low platform onto a higher deck, and the beaver opened a low door that hinged back into the higher deck. Go in there, there's a lad, said the beaver. Watch out for the steps. Going in, Mr. Rabbit followed a wooden set of steps down the narrow stairway and found himself in a dark and even narrower passageway. "Listen here, Noggin. Where are you taking me? I haven't done anything, you know, and I have an important job to be getting on with. It doesn't include any of this being locked up in a smelly old boat." As he spoke, the beaver was opening a door off the passageway that led into a small room with a single porthole. "Nogger, not Noggin," grumbled the beaver, "and this is the forecastle." He turned to leave. "Listen here, matey. I'm locking ye up in here, and he's not to go escaping. Oh, no, don't go running away from old Nogger. I have enough bother without chasing around after wet rabbits, so be a good lad, eh?" As he spoke, Mr. Rabbit couldn't fail but notice that he wasn't actually looking in his direction at all. He realized that his eyesight must be very poor. "Can't you see very well?" asked Mr. Rabbit. "What?" exclaimed the beaver. What makes he say that? Not see? Why, I can see as well as any. Nothing wrong with my sight. Why, these old eyes are as sharp as razors, in fact." As he spoke, Mr. Rabbit was slowly edging his way back towards the door and almost made it out past the beaver, except that in squeezing by, he rubbed against the wall, knocking off an old hurricane lamp that had been hanging from a nail. In a flash, the beaver spun around and caught the rabbit by his ears. "Oh, naughty, naughty rabbit. Knows old Nogger's secret, eh? Well, not just rabbits has good ears, lucky for he. If the captain had caught he wandering about, he'd have put he back in the drink, that's for sure, as water's wet he would." He pushed Mr. Rabbit back into the room and stood over the now closed door. The rabbit rubbed his ears as he looked at the pirate beaver before him. "Secret? You mean no one else knows you can't see too well?" It seemed obvious to him that anyone looking at the poor old wobbly-eyed creature would soon discover his secret quickly enough. "Shh! Smart old kind of a rabbit, aren't he? Well, if he's so clever then, tell old Nogger what he was doing fish impressions for, eh?" "Fish impressions?" asked Mr. Rabbit. "What do you mean?" "Well, what was he doing in the sea? How did he get there? Seems to me he's got some secrets of your own, eh?" His eyes hunted around his face as he continued. "And what's the big important job he's got then, eh? Oh yes, Rabbit's got his own secrets all right." Mr. Rabbit could see that Nogger was probably correct, in that there was actually a little point in trying to escape when there was really nowhere to go. He wished that Mr. Mousey was here. He would know what to do and have a way of doing it. He could see that it would likely not be a good idea to tell the beaver, even though he actually didn't seem the worst sort, how he came to be in the water and where he had been going. As it happened, he was saved the effort of thinking up another answer to all those questions by a sudden, violent pitching of the ship. A voice called out from outside the door, "Nogger! All hands to the seals! It's going to be a big 'un, and no mistake!" Nogger called back in reply and left the room straight away, locking the door as he went. The rising howl of the wind left no question as to what the big 'un was. A storm was bearing down fast. A storm on a ship, out at sea. Oh, dear me, oh. Well, what's going to happen next? Well, and what has happened, Mr. Mousey? He's been knocked out. And where is he? But, well, we'll have to find out in the next chapter, which will be chapter 10. But I hope you enjoyed that as we go along with our story. And who are these pirates and where are they going? But we'll find out that later. Okay, you take care, boys and girls. Thanks for joining us again in our story of Mr. Mousey Beyond the Silver Sea. Bye-bye. Till next time. God bless.